Our reading today comes from the former UUA president, Reverend William F. Scholes. I am a third-generation Unitarian Universalist. This religion runs in my blood. It has spurred me and soothed me. But most Unitarian Universalists are at one time or another newcomers to our faith. 90% of us come from other religious traditions. Some come from none at all. This makes for both richness and confusion. Nonetheless, regardless of background, we each share a few fundamental convictions. Finally, let me put it this way. Too often in our world, religion has been the agent of division and fear. Unitarian Universalism seeks to heal a fractured world and the broken lives within it by calling every one of us to the best that is in us. Beyond nationalism and ethnic prejudice, beyond materialism and greed, beyond the petty and the shallow, we invoke a global loyalty, an ecological ethic, and a deeper mercy. In the last analysis, our Unitarian Universalist mission and the faith that sustains it is clear and straightforward. We would treat the wounds of a narrow spirit with the salve of a generous heart. How better than that to eradicate fear? How better than that to honor life's mysteries? I want to begin today with a story, but it's important that I say the details have been changed just slightly to protect this individual's privacy. Many years ago, while serving as a palliative care chaplain, I was sent to the room of a young mother in her early 30s, I'd guess, who was dying from a chronic illness that, while very serious, was not immediately terminal. The physicians had done everything they could to explain the myriad of ways she could still, even at this late moment, add years to her life. But much to their distress, her husband, and consequently the patient herself, declined each recommendation. So, frustrated and desperate, the doctors turned it over to our palliative care team. As a chaplain, it was a part of my role to bridge the gap between the spiritual life and needs of the patient and the medical world. Sometimes my efforts were directed at the patient and the patient's family, and often they were needed by the medical care team providing the care. I spent many hours with this woman over the several weeks she was in our care, and in the end, with all my efforts to understand her decision for myself, I received this reply in the calmest, most assured voice. My husband will not allow it, and my religion tells me that he is the head of my house. That thing her spouse would not allow her to have was not experimental treatment. It was proven. It was not a medication that would lead to more pain than it was worth. It was not, as far as I could ever find, in opposition to her faith tradition's teaching. But if it had been, this patient believed she held no power over her own life, the very life of her life. Each day I met with her, I left with conflicting feelings: powerlessness, fear, anger, compassion, dread, and grief. And while I wouldn't say she was at peace with it, she was firm in her decision. Despite my best efforts to navigate my role and professional boundaries, I did try everything I could to offer a different perspective. Of course, I refused to bully, belittle, or pressure her, but I used every word I had in my vocabulary to shift her understanding of that treacherous church doctrine, to remind her of her own worth, to educate her on abuse, medical neglect, and that her own God had provided the medication and the physicians to assist her. But I still entered her room one day to find an empty bed. I was distraught. How could one endure the waste of it? That beautiful life, those two motherless children, that husband who quite possibly believed he was doing what God and his pastors told him to do. The rage I felt for whoever had come up with such an abusive teaching to begin with burned inside of me, and it still does. But in all of my anger, I found it was simultaneously an absolute affirmation for me of my faith. That moment, like many before and after, reminds me of how life-saving our beliefs are as Unitarian Universalists. I saw in front of my own eyes proof of how a person's beliefs guide their actions, even against their own instinct to preserve their life. And that if a horrifying belief like the one this patient clung to could harm, hinder, divide, or even end a life, what might a belief that she and all of us are sacred, good, worthy, and beloved result in? I dare suggest it would result in equity, art, diversity, connection, acceptance, self-reflection, and empowerment, perhaps even a better, longer life. Religion is hard to escape. We are swimming in it here in the South, aren't we? For the better part of modern history, it has been sheer luck whether or not you would be exposed to life-stealing or life-giving theologies. Being active in a religious community was an essential part of life as an American for centuries. Your church or temple or mosque was the center of your social life, your place for continuing education, as clergy were often some of the only folks who were educated beyond primary school, even some of the only folks who could read or write in any given territory. Your place of worship was mostly a warm building. Food afterwards, a comforting presence when you were lonely, and a source for answers when you were questioning. For better or for worse, weekly attendance at services was more or less required to be considered an upstanding member of a community. However, over the past few decades, and if we're honest, the past half a century or more, participating in organized religion has become an unpopular practice for many. And there are some really sincere reasons for this. Our world is much bigger and more connected than it ever has been before. We connect with people easier through quicker forms of travel and through the internet, so it becomes easier to find comfort when you are lonely and answers when you are questioning. As we largely shifted away from being an agricultural society, more and more people began to engage in higher forms of education, decentralizing the power and hopefully wisdom of the office the clergy contained. There are organizations, nonprofits, and government programs, or at least there were, to help when you are cold or hungry. In a large part of the U.S., not attending worship services has been somewhat destigmatized. But this is all secondary. We rarely hear these answers when we ask people why they aren't active in religious communities anymore. If this was Family Feud, what would the number one answer be? Any guesses? Don't believe it. Yeah. Religious hypocrisy. Yeah. In a 2019 Gallup poll, the institution that was trusted most by Americans was the military at 73%. This is 2019. Organized religion, 36% of people said they trusted it. It's no wonder why. When that poll was taken, we had seen some of the most well-known religious organizations fall from grace. The scandals of evangelical televangelists throughout the 80s, the Catholic priest abuse scandal, Southern Baptist leadership in the news for sexual harassment and abuse, the United Methodist Church debating whether or not to split over if they should ordain openly out clergy and perform queer weddings. Of course, they have since followed through with that split. The Church of the Latter-day Saints, Mormons, worked to overturn LGBTQ rights in California, despite the vast majority of Californians being in favor of it. And Leah Remini had begun her highly public work of exposing and discrediting the Church of Scientology. And of course, the way religious organizations have propped up racist ideology and supported political candidates that live outrageously immoral lives. It appeared more and more that the highly respected place of faith, and in particular, organized religion, had used its power over and over again to hurt people. And while that had, of course, always been happening, look at the Dark Ages, folks, information was now suddenly accessible to everyone immediately. It became more difficult to hide duplicity and hypocrisy. And therefore, congregants found it more and more difficult to listen as they were told to live out the highest morals by the very person who was actively harming others with their words and deeds. I understand that this speaks very clearly to this congregation's history as well. But there is more to this religious hypocrisy. It wasn't and still isn't just the institutions or the clergy degrading public trust. The theology, specifically from some evangelical and Orthodox organizations, was becoming less and less relevant. We know more about human psychology and are witness to such grand displays of human beauty and kindness that a theology that demeans humanity, a theology that puts a barrier around its evolution, a theology that ignores the complicated ways that humans behave, or theology tied to political hypocrisy struggles to ring true to believers and instead begins to reek solely of institutional self-interest. Raise your hand if you said to yourself at one time or another in your life that you could never imagine yourself stepping into a church, synagogue, mosque, or temple again. Keep them up. How many of you were raised with religion but were unchurched or did not attend worship services for years before finding this congregation? Yeah, keep them up. How many of you have been harmed in large or small ways in the past by a religious community, by religious dogma, theology, or by clergy? Yeah. Now take a look around you. Do you see how many people have their hands raised? Yeah. You are among others who understand to varying degrees the pain that can often come alongside the joy of religion. Perhaps your religious trauma or experience doesn't rival the one I outlined with my patient earlier. Thank God for that. And perhaps it was equal or worse than that. Either way, I want to say to you, I am so sorry. Nothing you could have ever done would have made you deserve that. I am so sorry that someone abused their position in your life, took advantage of you by using your spirituality against you. I'm so sorry that they cloaked their abuse in a language of reverence. And I'm grateful that you are here today, not because this is a place where wounds don't happen. This is a human institution, and it is imperfect and fallible. But this is also a place that is capable of healing and beauty and goodness. I'm grateful you are here because it means you've not given up, that there is even a glimmer of hope for a new beginning for your spiritual journey. Jim Palmer, a former senior pastor for a non-denominational Christian church, left ministry and became a humanist, author, speaker, and chaplain for these very reasons. He created a list of toxic religious lies based upon some of the very theology he was preaching from the pulpit himself. I'd like to share some of them with you now. As I read them, think about whether these lies you were taught in your religious upbringing, if they were, and how they may or may not have influenced your relationship with religion. I am inherently bad. I can't trust myself. My heart is wicked. I deserve punishment. I don't measure up. I am powerless. Self-denial is holiness. I need forgiveness for who I am. I need to be saved from myself. I am worthless on my own. Being devoted to God means staying in an abusive relationship. Therapy or medication is a lack of faith. Self-care is selfish. The world is evil. If I mess up, I will lose my salvation and go to hell. People I love deeply are in hell or will go there. Everything outside my church culture is a threat. I can never be good enough. Feelings are dangerous and not trustworthy. I am not capable of thinking for myself. Obedience is true discipleship. Questioning is a spirit of rebellion. I must be perfect. My struggles mean I am not trusting God. I am nothing without Jesus. I am weak and he is strong. And lastly, God will fix it for me. Jim says that any human relationship that emphasizes this dynamic would be easily considered abusive. I have heard every single one of these statements or sentiments like it during my time in ministry. It was exactly these teachings that the dying mother spoke to me. These unforgivable lies took her life, along with the countless other patients that I met. And lest we assume these lies are only applicable to one particular faith, I assure you I heard them spoken by Muslims and Jews and Buddhists and Hindus and atheists and more. We might be tempted to write ourselves as UUs out of this, and by and large, few of these, if any, apply to our understanding of how a relationship with the divine ought to look. But we know we still have ministers and congregants and systems that do harm. I would add that it's often the moment we find ourselves feeling a heightened sense of superiority that we are unable to truly see ourselves and our own failures. When we are so busy looking down our nose at those who still believe these lies, we fail to engage our empathy. We fail to remember that they were given those lies by somebody with spiritual authority in their lives, who were given those lies by somebody in spiritual authority in their lives, and so on and so forth. In our desire to separate those people from us, we fail to see that we are the same. That when you looked around at those people holding their hands up, you were looking at the faces of people you care about who have been injured in some way by religion, or who have injured others with their sincerely held beliefs. How do we move past that hurt, that harm? How do we heal the religious trauma so many of us have experienced? Like all things worth doing in this lifetime, it takes work, hard, painful work, whether that work is done with a therapist, a minister, or just you and your journal. You first need to deconstruct and process what you experienced. I found an excellent resource on this subject written by a woman named Grace Allen. She writes, "Deconstruction is the method of taking what you've learned, pulling it apart, asking yourself, and God, if God applies to your faith, what's real and what isn't?" Deconstruction is all about asking questions. To deconstruct is a fearful endeavor, she writes. To take your faith, your religion, your childhood, memories, things you hold in your heart as sacred and largely untouchable, and start figuring out if it's true, that's scary. And some of us are never able to face that fear after already experiencing a trauma or suffering to begin with. But ultimately, while deconstruction is very important, it's most crucial because it leads to reconstruction. Reconstruction is the process of figuring out who you are, where you stand, what's important to you, why is it important to you, and owning that truth without offering apologies for it. Everyone who raised their hand earlier has done some form of this deconstruction and reconstruction. Some of you spent months following us online before you were ready to step foot in this building. Some of you are working every day to let go of the fear and anxiety developed as children or young people in a religious community, to let go of the concept of hell and eternal damnation, to release the shame and guilt you've been force-fed, to dispatch of the illusion of human separateness and hierarchy, because you have seen a glimpse of a higher truth, a truth that includes all of us. You do this difficult work of deconstructing and then reconstructing your beliefs because you are making room to embrace the full spectrum of your human experience. Because you have learned that imperfection is not a sin. I'm going to say that again. Imperfection is not a sin. It is a condition, a requirement, a personhood. That love, when given without coercion or strings attached and freely accepted, is the most sacred gift we could ever experience, regardless of the genders or sexuality associated with it. That your spiritual journey will have highs and lows, but that experiencing them does not mean you are a bad person, unworthy of the divine's or humanity's love, only that you are still growing. Because you know you are worthy of a faith, of a theology, of a community that treats you with dignity and respect. The gift of a pluralistic tradition like ours, the gift of having 90% of our faith come from other faith traditions, is that so many of us have our own insights and wisdom to share from our experience of Reconstruction. It means that you are not alone as you struggle with your work of spiritual healing. That through kindness and patience and a different perspective, we are healing each other. Religion is capable of bringing out such goodness from us that I'm thankful that in my moments of conflict, in my moments of religious struggle, I did not throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. So sorry, sweet pea. And your presence here today means that you did not either. I continue to be grateful for that every Sunday. May it always be so. Amen, and blessed be.